Every day they're printing 125 billion. Every single day. And they're going to print more and more money, which means savers are losers, just as I predicted. Your money is going to be worthless in a few years. The real problem of this crisis started back in 1904, when the richest guys on earth took over the education system in the United States. They formed a thing called the General Education Board. It was formed by guys like Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan. And what they pulled out of education was financial education. And so the reason they could rip us off, as you and I know, is via the mechanism of money. And that's why I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It was a warning shot across the bow back in 1997. I said, wake up, something's coming down the road. So we're here right now. This is the biggest transformation in the history of the world. It's from industrial age to information age. If you're losing money right now, the problem starts in what you were taught in school. Because they never taught you anything about money. They never taught you about a financial statement, like my rich dad did. They teach you that diploma is everything. It's a piece of toilet paper. BS. Right.
And you buy into that mechanism of money, and you believe that that is the only thing to focus on. And what you're saying right now with these stimulus packages is all of this money being given, quote unquote, away by the government to everybody is actually devaluing your dollar, it's devaluing your pension, it's devaluing your savings, and it's wiping out businesses. You're dying by this sword.
Yeah, and the harder you work for money, the poorer you're going to get. That's the tragedy. So this is how what Fuller talked about, the prison is inside our head, Buckminster Fuller. It starts with misinformation and misorientation. Misinformation, misorientation. And he says, how dare our schools punish kids for making mistakes? How else do you learn if you don't make a mistake and learn from your mistake? He says, God designed us to learn by making mistakes. For instance, a baby learns to walk by falling down. Baby learns, to ride a bicycle by falling off the bicycle. Tiger Woods, the greatest golfer ever in history of the world, because he made more mistakes than you and I did. But our schools punish you for making mistakes. That's misorientation, misinformation.
And that's because our schools were basically built to create workers that will do what you tell them to do because they value this thing called money. And they think that's going to allow them to live a life. And that's obviously completely wrong, because the rich don't work for money. The rich create their own wealth. And when a time like this happens, it becomes blatantly obvious what's going on with the people that are understanding money and the ones that aren't.
You see, the stimulus package is bailing me out. And I need to be bailed out. I mean, I have massive amounts of debt. So the first time in history, Brian, I'm not a real estate guy, but I have a lot of real estate. They're bailing out commercial real estate because that's what the rich really have. So, there's tall office buildings and shopping centers and all that, they're all collapsing right now. 2008, it was, those credit default swaps, it was for residential real estate. So they bailed them out. This next crash is for the hedge funds and private equity that invested in all this commercial real estate. So I have another $100 million project coming out, but I just got bailed out. I just got backed up by the Fed and the government. So that's why it's socialism for the rich. Unfortunately, there's capitalism for the poor middle class, those that work for money. You're on your own. Right. You own a small restaurant and you got to let go of your staff. You're no different than your staff right now. So for many people, this corona crisis and the ensuing depression that we're going into is your wake-up call, or you're going to be a victim and somebody's going to step on you that the little worm you are because you didn't metamorphosize. You didn't transition from an immature form to a mature form.
Now, people are at home right now watching this and they're like, okay, Robert, I wanna metamorphosize. What do they start doing? What are some steps they can start doing right now? Do they think about this whole concept of the information age versus the industrial age? Do they think about how they start a business? Do they go back to the basics of Rich Dad, Poor Dad? What are some of the things they can do to really get some momentum and start getting out of that cocoon?
Well, let me start again. The metamorphosis begins when you look in the mirror. And it's just like when I was going to blow this little boy's head off in Vietnam. I said, why am I doing this? Why am I going to kill this little 10-year-old boy? And he was a Viet Cong. I mean, I was justified by the rules of engagement to shoot him. But one day I went, why am I doing this? And if you're standing in front of the mirror today, with this coronavirus and looming depression, how did I get here is the question. What don't I know? What did my information, education, cultural background, what did not prepare me for today? That's where the transformation or the metamorphosis begin. I mean, you take responsibility. Everybody talks about rights, but we have personal responsibilities too. And unfortunately, our university systems have failed us miserably. And the reason for that is every professor wants tenure. That's my whole family. That was the most important thing about getting a job, was tenure, job security for life. And that's what they teach kids without knowing it. They teach kids that life is dangerous and you need to be protected. So they're immature. College professors are some of the most immature. They might be very smart mentally, but immature financially. They can't take care of themselves. So they're teaching kids to be victims. That's why these trigger mechanisms and you can't say words that are hurtful and all this stuff. So they're teaching that you're a victim, you're vulnerable. And what you teach and what I teach is that, hey, don't be a victim, be proactive.
Yeah, no, but you're right. I mean, this could be the greatest wake-up call for most of the citizens around the world. And look, from what we see with the numbers, most people are going to survive through this. But let's be honest, it also could have been worse. So the question is, are you going to start making choices today about your health, about your obesity, about your smoking, about your habits? Are you going to start making choices today about your financial education? And are you going to take ownership for where you're at right now? Unfortunately, everything you hear coming out of the media is preaching it's not your fault and the government's going to take care of you, and that's just going to set you up to be a slave, and then the next crisis is going to hit and the next crisis is going to hit. And again, I completely agree with you, Robert. This is perhaps one of the best chances in your entire life to literally be smacked into consciousness and say, wait a second, it's time I stop living in fear, take ownership of what's happening, and do, as you said, which is, what does God want you to do? And you explain this in a good way. And God, that is different than what you want to do. What you want to do for you is this selfish ego talking. What God wants you to do is what you're supposed to do for the greater good. And it sounds counterintuitive, but that choice always brings you financial prosperity, spiritual prosperity, and a great life.
It's really not so much what God wants us to do. What does God want done? It's a pain in the butt. It's easier just to take the bailout. And for me, I get up every morning. The hardest thing, Brian, is I have so much money coming in now. I have to fight lethargy, complacency. I got mine. Screw you guys. That's what I battle now. I told you so. I told you so. You didn't listen to me. All of that, because we're all human beings. I have a good side and a bad side. I battle me every morning. It goes on between this year and that year.
We see that when big checks are being written, no matter if it's in the UK or the US or any other country, that means that basically they're giving the money on this way and they're taking it back the other way. They're taking it from us somewhere, because money doesn't come for free.
When I saw right after 9/11, I saw the next increment come in, Rich Dad's prophecy. And I said the biggest financial crash was going to come in 2016. Now, I didn't foresee quantitative easing, but we didn't have, back in 2002 when this book was published, there was no quantitative easing and there was no zero interest rate policy. And I went, oh my God, and then Trump got elected. So this was postponed 4 years. It's here today. Rich Dad's prophecy is more true today than ever before. And it's about why the biggest stock market crash in history was still coming. Wall Street Journal trashed me. They took me to the cleaners, said, you don't know what you're talking about. And I don't blame them, because I was threatening their nest, you know what I mean? The real problem isn't the stock market. The real problem is the shadow banking system. The banking system, the financial markets we don't see, which is the repo market, the consumer corporate credit market, and then the commercial paper market. They're broke. So this stuff was happening in September last year, but they keep hyping it, CNBC and those guys. I know they have a job to do. They keep hyping this market up. So the market was hitting great peaks. And so I tell my friends who have 401ks and IRAs and all this stuff, I said, hey, did your financial planner call you in December and tell you to get out? No, they told you to stay in. They told you to stay in. And meanwhile, the stimulus package comes in, it jacks the price. After they started to deflate, the stimulus market came in, they popped it up again so guys could escape. So the rich could escape. Meanwhile, they're on CNBC telling you, stick it out, stay for the long term, the market will bounce back. Oh, give me a break. Are you that stupid? Can't you see what they're doing? And the fact is they cannot. So this crash, as you know, just prior to this crash was called the everything bubble. Stock market was high, real estate was high. I don't know what else was high. Gold and silver, everything was high. The trouble now, everything's deflating. I'm in serious trouble financially at one end because I own hotels and I have 8,000 rental units. Today, they're not paying rent. Now, does that affect me? Of course it does. But the way my rich dad taught me to play the game is I have LLCs and S corporations and C corporations. Corporations, I hide behind that. I own nothing technically. They can sue me for my money, but they'll sue a limited liability corporation. They can't touch me. So this is what I taught in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So it's not the asset. I have businesses, I have real estate, I have stocks, bonds. I don't have any stocks, bonds. I have gold and silver, I have oil. Now, is my oil guy in trouble? No, because he didn't finance his oil drilling with debt. So some people are doing really well because they saw this coming. So it's not the asset class. It's really understanding or looking behind the curtain, seeing the wizard. Right now is Powell and Larry Summers and these guys. I mean, they misled us totally. So am I going to cry? No. What am I going to do? I'm going to change me. I can't change them, but I can change me. That's my attitude. Now, gold goes up and down because the gold market is manipulated. The futures market, the ETF market, GLD, SLV, and then the physical gold. So the thing I think is interesting is the price of gold goes down, but you can't buy any gold at the physical market. So the futures market is coming down, the GLD price is coming down, paper market is coming down, but physical, you can't get anything on it. Why? It's because the rich are hoarding it. The rich are hoarding gold and silver like toilet paper and guns. The poor and middle class are calling their financial planner, and the financial planner is telling them to stay in it for the long term. And meanwhile, the rich are getting out. Wake up is my message.